So the big moment is here, and I'm looking forward to this. We're now going to go into the details, the specifics of what IMANI found when they poured through the Auditor-General's report. Ladies and gentlemen, to do the presentation of the index is Dennis Asari. He is research consultant with IMANI. A big round of applause for Dennis as he comes forth with the details.
Good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen. So we have gathered here today, as has already been said by the keynote speaker, Professor Bobkin, to discuss something that is very critical to our economic development. And one of the things that the country is facing is that our sustainability, our sustainable development faces enormous threats. One major area is that our revenues are not increasing. The government estimates that our public revenue, domestic resources, peaked at about $9.8 billion between 2017 and 2019. And we are unable to also mobilize more revenue. And between 2021 and 2023, they intend to increase that to about $12 billion US. While we are unable to collect more revenue, our public debt is escalating. And currently, the Bank of Ghana estimates it to be about $55.1 billion. That's about 390 billion Ghana cedis. In the midst of that, what we have also realized is that in 2021, when the government did the country gap analysis of the SDGs, they estimated that the country would need to raise about $522 billion US to prosecute all the SDG goals if we are supposed to achieve it within the target in 2030. The gap stands about $423 billion US, and year on year, we should be able to raise not less than $43 billion US to finance the SDGs. Else, we are going to miss critical targets such as zero hunger, no poverty, creating sustainable cities and management, and delivering decent jobs and safe societies for our people. At the moment, about 45.6% of our population are multidimensionally poor. And the last time we did a poverty profile report, almost 2 million people who live in rural areas face extreme poverty. The pandemic has worsened the plight of these over 2 million people who live in extreme poverty. And all of these have created much need for us to now critically look internally to examine how efficient public institutions are using the meager public resources that we raise to address these critical social problems that we face. And that is why for us at IMANI, the Fiscal Recklessness Index is a critical flagship program within IMANI for us to investigate how public institutions are using our resources, the level of inefficiencies and indiscipline in the use of public funds. So in this presentation, I'll do a brief context of where we are as a country and also the purpose of this project, the legal framework guiding public financial management in Ghana. Then we delve much deeper into the report, analyzing the level of recklessness in the use of public funds. So the overarching aim of public financial management is to ensure strategic allocation of resources and deliver efficient service delivery in Ghana, or ensure that services that we deliver to citizens, we do it at the highest level of efficiency. And when we do that, in the wake of our public debt and low revenue mobilization, what we have also observed is that the level of indiscipline or the financial cost of the recklessness of ministries, departments, and agencies are increasing this time compared to 2010 and 2014. So if you look at between 2015 and 2020, where we have tightened our public financial management system, implemented more laws, and established institutions to ensure greater accountability, the recklessness or the financial cost of the indiscipline of MDAs are actually increasing now than before, which tell us that the public financial management systems that we have are not translating in delivering efficiency. And if you compare 2010 to 2014, the financial cost of the recklessness of MDAs to the period 2015 and 2020, you see that the recklessness has increased by about 13 times. So between 2010 and 2014, the financial cost of irregularities was about 1.4 billion cedis, but between 2015 and 2020, it's about 13.9 billion. which shows that the public financial management system that we have, to some extent, is not delivering the level of efficiency, and public institutions are not using the resources wisely, leading to these irregularities that we have. The pandemic has also exposed a lot of vulnerabilities in our public financial management system, worsen our fiscal situation, which have all made it necessary for us to look at what alternative measures can we look at to improve the prudence in spending or ensure efficient use of public resources. The last 20 years have been marked by multiple public financial management reforms. And so if you trace as far back as 2000, the 1998 to 2003, when we implemented the Public Financial Management Assessment Reform Program, the aim was to look at the challenges with managing public resources and how we can improve that. Fast forward to 2010, we implemented an integrated financial management system that brought together all the 33 MDAs and about 250 spending business units within public institutions to ensure transparency and accountability. Fast forward, between 2015 and 2020, we implemented a full-blown public financial management reform that also sought to enhance the efficiency of the use of public funds. And between 2022 and 2025, the government is about to roll out a new public financial management reform program. A few successes that we recorded over the period is that we've been able to establish the Treasury Single Account that sought to bring all accounts of public institutions together so that now government will operate just a single account. Over the period, we've also been able to implement an integrated HR management system to address the challenges with our payroll system and also enhance some accountability within the public financial management framework. We also passed the public financial management law and regulation. Despite all of these successes that we recorded, the irregularities of public institutions, that is MDAs, keep increasing. And as I already indicated, the period where we implemented a full-blown public financial management reform and a new PFM is about to be rolled out, and even implemented an IT-based system to manage the spending of public institutions, implemented an integrated digitized procurement system, the irregularities have increased more than 13 times. And so it begs the question whether these reforms are delivering results. And one independent assessment that is able to gauge the efficiency of our public financial management system is the Fiscal Recklessness Index, beyond the public expenditure and financial assessment program that is run by the government. So the overarching aim of the project that we did was that the Auditor-General's report is replete with a lot of financial irregularities. But for citizens to carefully understand the implication of these irregularities on service delivery, we had to sit down and critically analyze that. And to analyze that and communicate it very well, we put out an index that can effectively measure the level of recklessness and indiscipline in the spending of public institutions. And what we seek to achieve with this report is that we engage key oversight institutions such as Parliament, the Public Accounts Committee, to understand the profligacy in spending and the flagrant abuse of the public financial management system, leading to increasing financial costs of the irregularities. The methodology we used was that we created a database, and before I go there, in 2016, we conducted the first Fiscal Recklessness Index, where we look at the data between 2012 and 2014, the level of recklessness in the spending of public institutions. So if you look at the PFM trend that I show, it appears that the Fiscal Recklessness Index is very timely because at the end of each PFM project, we deliver a report and it effectively assesses whether that PFM program has been very effective. So this time, we also look at the period between 2015 and 2020. So we collated all the financial irregularities of ministries, departments, and agencies reported by the Auditor-General, and we created a database of that. Now, to ensure coherence and also address the effect of extreme variables, because the data is very heterogeneous. Some are in thousands, millions, and billions. So to ensure that the data is coherent and we present it in an easy way to understand that, we normalize the data to address outlier effects on even the rankings. And when we did that, necessarily what it does is that it brings all the financial irregularities between 0 and 1. So the higher the irregularity, then the recklessness approaches 1. The lower the irregularity, then it approaches 0. After we do that, then we now come to computing the fiscal recklessness. And the Auditor-General assesses the fiscal discipline or otherwise of MDAs using 7 typologies. That's the cash, there's the tax, there's the stores and procurement, rent, payroll, and contract and debt and loans. So these are the main typologies the Auditor-General assesses the financial efficiency or the discipline or otherwise of MDA. So we also use these as our variables to calculate the index. Now, after doing that, one thing we observed was that the contribution of the different typologies are different. So we can't apply the same weight to them. So the weight of a particular typology, for example, cash, is based on its contribution to the recklessness or irregularity within that period. And once you have determined the weight for the typologies, now the model that we created on Excel will calculate the index with scores. After calculating the scores, then it also does a ranking of MDs. But going beyond just calculating the recklessness, what we also wanted to understand, and that is the improved methodology of this year's fiscal recklessness, is that we also conducted key interviews with experts in PFM to understand the root causes of the irregularities in our public financial management system. And so in this report, we don't only show the losses or the financial cost, but we are also able to undertake a root cause diagnostic analysis to show where or the sources of the irregularities. If you look at from our constitution to all the laws, the Public Financial Management Act, regulation, and all the other supporting legislation, the overarching aim is to achieve transparency and accountability. So from the constitution down to the PFM, it has developed structures that seeks to enhance accountability. So if you try to put all the laws together, it creates more of a responsibility and reporting relationship with a broader and bigger oversight agency as Parliament, the Public Accounts Committee. The Ghana Audit Service performs the external audit scrutiny dimension of the PFM, and Ministry of Finance and Bank of Ghana does the revenue allocations or budget allocations to the MDAs, working with the Controller and Accountant General. Then the ministries and department and MMDAs and other state agencies engage the Controller and Accountant General and Ministry of Finance. But there are other private institutions like the Institute of Chartered Accountants Ghana that also offers some sort of technical support to the government in terms of implementation of some international standard of public sector accounting frameworks in our public financial management system. Just before I get into the real details of this year's Fiscal Recklessness Index, what we wanted to understand is that if you look at the composite trend of irregularities before 2015 and after 2015, has there been a change? And what you observe is that between 2010 and 2014, you realize that the peak irregularity was just about 500 million Ghana cedis between 2010 and 2014. But when you move to between 2015 and 2020, you see that the peak irregularity is about 5 billion Ghana cedis. And the average year-on-year irregularity between 2015 and 2020 is about 2.3 billion Ghana cedis, which means that our peak irregularity has increased by more than 4 times just in the space of 6 years. And that is even the period where we have tightened accountability institutions. We have passed a lot of laws to even prevent people or deter people from engaging in some irregular activities within our public institutions. But we are not seeing that translate. So it means that the irregularities appear to be getting worse compared to the previous years. So when we put the Auditor General's report of financial irregularities between 2015 to 2020 together, we get a composite financial cost of about 13.9 billion. And if you compare that to the previous period, 2010 to 2014, that's about 13 times of what we recorded between 2010 and 2014, a period where we are supposed to see much more improvement in the financial irregularities of MDAs. And this 13.9 billion, if you try to compare it to the GDP in 2020, it's about 3.69%. And when you draw an average year-on-year effect of the irregularities, we estimate about 0.52% of our GDP all lost due to financial irregularities or public institutions not complying with the public financial management system. And within this period, the highest irregularity was recorded in 2018. And you see that tax irregularity was the highest. In fact, in that period, tax irregularity was more than 90% in 2018. And key examples that the Auditor-General cited was that 10 oil marketing companies lifted oil from Tema Oil Refinery without paying the appropriate duties. And this was over 33 million Ghana cedis. Over the period to within the same 2018, about 1,719 vehicles that were auctioned at the Tema port, the government could not account for about 25.5 million cedis of the taxes or the revenue that they collected on those auctioned vehicles. And over the period, you will see clearly that two main irregularity typologies dominate over this period: tax and cash-related irregularities. And in 2016, cash irregularities of one institution, or that dominated in 2016, was about 1.15 billion Ghana cedis. So you see that the major source of the irregularities appear to be coming from tax and cash typology or dimension of our public financial management system. And to say that averagely, we estimate that between 2015 and 2020, public institutions lose, or the combined effect of the recklessness of public institutions cost the country about 2.39 billion Ghana cedis. And this 2.39 billion Ghana cedis, it is more than how much we even spend additional healthcare spending in 2020 due to the pandemic. Again, using the education minister's analysis of how much money we have spent on the free SHS between 2017 and 2020, the education minister estimates about 7.7 billion Ghana cedis, which means that year on year, the average amount government spend is about 1.5 billion Ghana cedis. So between 2015 and 2020, the average cost of the recklessness of MDS is higher than how much you have spent year on year on a free senior high school. And which means that then the public financial management system is not really delivering on efficiency. In fact, if you take only contracts alone, the composite cost of contract irregularities was about 368 million Ghana cedis. And that 368 million Ghana cedis can finance the livelihood empowerment against poverty program 2 times. Because if you look at the 2019 expenditure on the LEAP, it was over 160 million Ghana cedis. And we see that only contract irregularities can finance that about 2 times. And the budget of the Ministry of Gender, Social and Children, Ministry of Gender and Children and Social Protection, you see that their budget for 2019, or the expenditure for 2019, the financial cost of contract irregularities was even more than that, was even higher than the budget of the ministry. If you look at an example like stores and procurement, the Auditor-General estimates that between 2010 and 2020, the cost of procurement irregularities is about 143 million Ghana cedis. But 136 million Ghana cedis of that was recorded just between 2016 and 2020. The same period where we amended our Procurement Act and even implemented a digitized electronic procurement platform. So it appears that all the measures that we are implementing to address the pitfalls in our public financial management system seem not to be delivering the results that we are looking for. And that is why we see a lot of irregularities being recorded. There's payroll irregularities were all attributed to issues like paying salaries for people that we can't even find them. That is, the ghost names syndrome is still there. And one challenge we identified is that currently there are 2 different platforms that have not been effectively integrated. And that is why we also saw a lot of payroll irregularities. So this graph even makes it much more clearer that you see tax and cash irregularities dominating throughout the years, with the exception of 2020, where debt and loans, and this was attributed to the Ministry of Health, where over 40 budget management centers took medical supplies and did not pay for that on time. But if you look at cash and tax alone, we estimate that it accounts for over 80% of our irregularities every year. And if you look at 2016, cash irregularity alone was about 94 94.83% of the total irregularity recorded. In 2018, you see that tax irregularity of the year was about 92.15%, which all points to the fact that this is the major area or source of problem for the country. And the major drivers of tax irregularities were taxes unaccounted for or uncollected. And most of them were related to custom duties not collected. In fact, 3,600 companies in 2019 and 2020 owed the government over 837 million Ghana cedis of both corporate and income tax that were unpaid. And in 2019 and 2020, the Auditor-General also estimate that all the 3,600 companies also owe the government over $100 million of corporate and income taxes that were unpaid. So it appears that lack of enforcement of tax collection measures is leading to a lot of the tax irregularities. With related to the cash, the key major problems we found over the period was that most of these MDAs were making payments without approval. Some of these MDAs were also engaged in non-lodgement of funds. So the statutory funds that they collect on behalf of government, we identified that some of them were not lodging it on time. And the institutions failed to apply the sanctions. For example, the GRA failed to consistently apply sanctions when taxes were not paid on time. And in 2018, they estimate that about 1.1 billion cedis of penalties were not collected. In 2018, that same period, we realized that about over 5 million of tax exemption was granted to some companies without approval from Parliament. And that was one of the source of irregularities that we identified. If you put all of that together, the composite financial irregularities that we recorded, you see that tax irregularity alone is more than 2/3 of the total irregularity recorded over the period, followed by cash. And if you look at the tax irregularity of 9.12 billion, the tax irregularity recorded by one institution, when we move to the recklessness index and score, is over 95% of the total tax irregularities recorded over the period. Debt and loans, although the other typologies appear to be small, but they are very significant when you try to compare them to some expenditure we incur in other sectors. One thing that we also wanted to observe is that this tax and cash irregularity appeared to be very dominant or were the main drivers of the irregularity. So we tried to look at the composite contribution of tax and cash irregularities in the last 10 years. And we realized that between 2010 and 2015, you see that the contributions were fluctuating, but the average contribution was just about 80%. But the moment we exited 2015, you see the trend shoot up into the 90s, and that the contribution of tax and cash irregularities increased so sharply by over 40%, and it stayed within the 96 to 97% rate for more than 4 years. And the drop in 2020 can be attributed to the effect of the pandemic on government revenue collection and other issues due to some mismanagement that we still. But because we did not spend much, or revenue collection and some waivers were given within that period, a lot of some of these tax revenues were not collected, and that if they were collected, we would have seen instances of non-lodgement of funds also appearing as one of the challenges or irregularities, and also public institutions not complying with the law when it comes to cash management in the sense of making payments without approval. And so averagely, we estimate that in the last 10 years, the average contribution of tax and cash irregularities over the period is a little over 80%. So these two typologies in the Auditor-General's report contribute over the last 10 years, over 80% of the irregularities that we are recording. And the main drivers of that was taxes not collected, non-lodgement of funds, public institutions making payments without approvals, and also making some unapproved transactions even outside the gift miss. And one challenge we also identified was that despite building the Treasury single account, we still see some MDAs holding private accounts in commercial banks. Another contributor to the cash irregularity was that commercial banks who collect revenue or tax revenue on behalf of government fail to lodge the funds based on the time frame provided by the PFM Act. And that was one of the major issues that government faced. So after looking at all the financial irregularities, then we now do the normalization and bring it into the index. And so we apply the weights to each of the typologies to compute the fiscal recklessness index. So first, it computes the score, and based on the score, it now computes the ranking for us. So overall, this is the fiscal recklessness score of the 29 MDAs in Ghana. And you see that the Ministry of Finance and its subsidiary agencies are the most fiscally reckless institution in the country. If you look at the recklessness score, composite recklessness score of 0.87, and the more the score approaches 1, the higher the level of recklessness. And when it approaches 0, then the institution is less fiscally reckless. And you see that over the 6-year period, the Ministry of Finance consistently appeared as the most reckless institution. That is, the Ministry of Finance and its subsidiary institutions were the most fiscally reckless institutions within the period. And one major reason is that when you say Ministry of Finance, it's not Ministry of Finance headquarters. When you say Ministry of Finance in the Auditor-General's report, it includes subsidiary agencies like the GRA, because the Ministry of Finance, beyond its role as a sector ministry, it's also a central management agency that also coordinates the work of other ministries. So sometimes when there's an irregularity, it also appears also in the activities of the Ministry of Finance. So we identified that majority of these irregularities were attributed to the institutions that were within the Ministry of Finance. And key institutions that came up strongly was the GRA and the Controller and Accountants General Department. If you look at between the Ministry of Finance and the next fiscally reckless agency, that's the Ministry of Health, the gap is about 0.7 points. That is about 70% difference, which shows that a lot of the recklessness and the profligacy in spending is centralized around a single agency and its subsidiary agencies. What you also see is that majority of the institutions are moderately reckless. That is in the yellow coding. Majority of them are moderately reckless, with just a few institutions like the Ministry of Information, Chieftaincy, and Government Machinery being some sort of less fiscally reckless. This also tells us that the recklessness in the spending of ministries and departments appears to be across all the public administration system, or it permeates every aspect of our public financial management. Because if you look at the top 5 institutions, there's Ministry of Finance, that's the central management agency. There's a social service ministry, that's Ministry of Health. There's an infrastructure-led ministry, the Ministry of Roads and Highways, Employment, Foreign Affairs. So it appears that it cuts across every aspect of our public financial management system or of our public administration. And we are not seeing much efficiency on the part of these institutions to address irregularities in their spending. When we did the ranking, it gives us a much more clearer picture. So over the period between 2015 and 2020, the most fiscally reckless institution is the Ministry of Finance. And you see that consistently, except 2020, where the Ministry of Health was the most reckless institution, the Ministry of Finance has consistently been, the Ministry of Finance and its subsidiary agencies have been the most reckless institution. And that is because cash and tax irregularities are the main source of the recklessness in our public financial management system, and they are the sector ministry that manages that, or the institutions under them manage that. That's Controller, Accountants General, and GRA. That is why that also influenced the performance of the Ministry of Finance in terms of their level of recklessness. Next is the Ministry of Health, and what is even telling is that this is a social service ministry that is supposed to deliver quality health care or essential care to the people. And if they are the second most reckless institution in terms of financial expenditure or in the use of public funds, it also questions the level of quality of service that they are delivering, or the ability to also deliver critical quality of service to the citizen. The third was Ministry of Roads and Highways, Employment, and Foreign Affairs. The ministries that appear to be less fiscally reckless, that doesn't mean that no irregularity was recorded for them, just that compared to the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Health, Roads and Highways, they are less fiscally reckless, and that in such ministries, if more stringent efforts are implemented, we can reduce the level of recklessness. But you see that overall, most of the ministries and departments we have in the country are moderately reckless, but the main reckless ones are the top 5. That's Ministry of Finance, Health, Roads and Highways, Employment, and Foreign Affairs. For us to carefully understand the root causes of these irregularities, we also undertook engagement with key PFM experts within government and outside government to understand the drivers of these irregularities. And the main problem we identified was weak compliance enforcement. If you look at the Auditor-General's report, in about 8 out of 10 cases, most of the tax-related irregularities were attributed to taxes that were not collected. And in fact, when the GRA also responded to the Public Accounts Committee in 2018, what we also observed was that they mentioned that some of the institutions, they can't find them. And generally, there's a reflection of our very weak ability to collect tax revenues on time. And that was reflected here because the GRA knows people who are owing, but the question is, why are they not collecting these taxes, or why are these taxes not collecting? And during our assessment, we also chanced on a report by an international agency that looks at tax revenue mobilization and looking at the indicators that they use. When it comes to tax mobilization or tax collection, Ghana performed very poorly in that area. So we identified high outstanding taxes being as a result of the weak compliance enforcement. And also, we also identified issues where they were not effectively applying the tax penalties. So when people failed to pay their taxes on time, the GRA were not sanctioning them and were not collecting the penalties. And in 2018, about 1.3 billion of tax penalties were not collected. And in fact, as at now, we've not seen any publicly available report on the companies who received exemption without approval from Parliament, what sanctions have been meted to them, because the tax liability of those two companies was over 10 million Ghana cedis. Another area of challenge was weak oversight and monitoring and evaluation of the MDAs. So if you look at the cash irregularity dimension alone, what you realize is that the main drivers are spending without approval, non-lodgement of funds, and poor management of funds that were given to some of the ministries, which also questions the level of internal control system or the efficiency of internal control systems in the public institutions. Another area that was very key to us was the internal control, that's the internal audit system. We found out that the internal audit system has broken down. At the moment, the internal auditors who are supposed to quality assure the process of spending do not have access to the GIFMIS. That is the main integrated financial management information system that is used to manage public funds. They do not have access to it. So they can only see transactions going through it, but they can't raise objections or stop transactions in the GIFMIS. And one other challenge also we identified is that the internal auditors in the MDAs, the management appear to be very diffused. So some are managed by SIGA, some are managed by the local government service, and others also by the internal audit agency. So that lack of coordination in management was also another problem that we identified. Then the issue of low revenue mobilization. Because some of the agencies too had relatively low amount of money for their spending, they tend to rely on some statutory funds that they collect on behalf of government to finance their activities. So when they collect these taxes, instead of paying them into government account, they were using some of those monies to also finance their activities. And that was because they were unable to raise much money or their allocations do not come on time. One major area too was weak enforcement of sanctions. So what you see is profligate spending, lack of controls in the use of public funds, but it appears that nobody is being sanctioned. And one major reason was that we've not seen the OSP and the Attorney General express a lot of interest in public financial management issues. So year in and year out, the Auditor-General identifies people who have abused Public Financial Management Act laws, that sanctions must apply. But because the AG is the one who can engage in prosecution of such activities, and the AG2 is tied with the Ministry of Justice, so that accountability we expect to see from the AG, we are not seeing that. And that was one of the major reasons why people are not deterred or are not afraid to engage in some of these recklessness. Another issue too is delayed prosecution of public officers. If you look at the work of the Public Accounts Committee, they sit over the report very late, and there's always a lag of accountability. So By the time they are setting, at the moment, they are now considering, I think, 2019 and 2020 report. By the time they are done and recommend sanctions, these officers would have been transferred or moved to different agencies. So it becomes very difficult to apply even institutional sanctions. And one major challenge with applying sanctions is that within every institution, the regulations that govern them have internal sanctions, but the heads of entities are not ready to apply these sanctions effectively. So you don't get within institutional sanctions, and that we always rely on an external agency to apply the sanctions. Another challenge is the weak parliamentary oversight in terms of ensuring efficiency accountability in the use of public funds. So if you look at the Public Accounts Committee, one of the challenges has been the political influence on their commitment. So most of that, if you read the report of the former chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, Dr. Abed Kandapa, there are times when they identify critical issues that may require prosecution, but the level of commitment on Parliament to push for these prosecutions to happen is not there. And even after the Public Accounts Committee sits, who even monitors to ensure that the recommendations and the sanctions that they recommended are fully enforced? And that was a major issue. And we also identified low utilization of the Financial and Economic Court. So in the Financial Administration Act 2003, we were supposed to set up a Financial Administration Court that was purposely for prosecuting corruption-related cases after the Auditor-General sent its report to Parliament. But this court has not been established, but the Chief Justice then also established a Financial and Economic Court that can also deal with the same issue. But over the years, we've not seen public institutions demonstrate commitment to using this court to apply the sanctions. So when you put all of these things, they combine to kind of create some tolerance for abuse of the public financial management system, leading to the consistent irregularities that we have recorded over the years, or between 2015 and 2020. So in conclusion, what we say is that the analysis provides enough evidence to suggest that the PFM policies and programs that we have implemented in the last 6 years are not yielding the needed results, or has not been able to control the profligate spending or the abuse of the public financial management laws, and that we are not getting optimal results from our PFM system. Again, the financial cost of the fiscal and discipline of MDAs points to the weaknesses in budget execution and management, because that is the point where the monies actually get spent. So if you look at the PFM stages, our major problem is at the budget execution and management. So we allocate the funds, public institutions use it, but we are seeing a lot of recklessness in the use of the public funds. And that shows that then that level of our PFM, we need to improve upon that. Another issue was political economy issues that affect the work of the MDA. So when irregularities occur at the institutional level, the heads of entities can also apply sanctions. But looking at the political influence on the work they do, because most of the MDAs you have in the country, their heads are appointed by the president. And so there's that sort of commitment to the political class or to the executive arm of government. Again, if you look at the boards and other committees established within our PFM, for example, the Audit Report Implementation Committee, if you look at the entity tender committees for procurement and all the other quality assurance committees, majority of their members are appointed by the president. So sometimes the extent of commitment you would expect from them is very limited. And if you look at the Audit Service Board, you also see that most of the members are appointed by the president. So the extent to which the Auditor-General will show commitment in even applying disallowance and surcharge sanctions is very low. The commitment is very, very low. Again, we also see that the Ministry of Finance and its subsidiaries top the list of the fiscally reckless institutions we have in the country, and that this points us to the fact that as central management agencies, we need to pay attention to how they utilize public resources in the country. So what we recommend is that the Auditor-General must rigorously apply the Disallowance and Surcharges Act. So the Article 187 of the Constitution gives the Auditor-General power, and that was affirmed in the case of Occupy Ghana, that the Auditor-General can apply or can disallow certain costs and surcharge public institutions. But over the years, what you see the Auditor-General doing is that the Auditor-General is recommending to institutions on the solutions to address it. When clear breaches have occurred, people have abused PFM laws. So the Auditor-General must be bold enough to apply the disallowance and surcharge powers that is given to it. The Attorney General too should also further enforce punitive measures against persons or individuals found to have committed irregularities. And we are yet to see the Attorney General fully pushing or prosecuting a public official for engaging in abuse of the public financial management system. And until we do that, people will never be deterred in terms of how reckless they are or how they use public resources. The Office of the Special Prosecutor is new. However, it has the power to even prosecute procurement-related corruption, which brings the Office of Special Prosecutor into our public financial management system. So the OSP must consistently monitor and follow the work of Parliament and ensure that people cited for clear breaches of the procurement law, the sanctions are applied, and the corruption-related cases are prosecuted. And again, the Ghana Audit Service function to the PFM cycle must be improved or aligned, because what you see is that there's some sort of delays in the submission of audit reports to Parliament, and that creates that accountability lag. So we are always doing firefighting. We go in to address the problem after the issue has occurred. Again, what you see is that the Auditor-General's report lumps the irregularities together. So you are unable to see a granular detail of even the other ministries, which specific department or agency is responsible for this recklessness, so that we can now drill down into the institution, look at the internal control system, and make proper recommendations on how to address that. We need to also improve more specialized audits. So there are times where there's been contentions about even the Auditor General's conclusion of certain transactions as irregularity. And the Auditor General has the power and the resources to undertake some special audits or some specific audits to address some alerts of breach of the PFM. And again, we need to strengthen the efficiency or the work of our Public Accounts Committee. Now, it appears that they sit and they listen and they make recommendations, but as to whether these recommendations are fully followed through and implemented, and whether these recommendations are having an impact on reducing the recklessness in the irregularities of public institutions, that cannot be seen. Because if the Public Accounts Committee is being effective, we should see that translate in deterring people from engaging in a lot of recklessness in the use of public funds. Thank you very much. So the full report is on our website that you can download and get even much more detail than what I've just shared. Thank you so much.